Good morning, my dear students. Today's topic of discussion is ethical issues in clinical research. So, we have our learning objectives and we'll try to attend a certain objective or fulfill our certain objective at the end of the session. And we'll start with the definition of biomedical research ethics and state its fundamental tenets. Try to state the composition, mandate, and activities of a research ethics committee. We'll try to recognize gray areas from the ethics standpoint in biomedical research. We'll try to explain the process of obtaining informed consent from a potential study participant. And ultimately, we'll try to utilize a Declaration of Helsinki, which is given probably in 1972 as a guiding document in debating upon clinical research ethics issues. So basically, by the term research may be viewed as any form of disciplined inquiry that aims to contribute to a body of knowledge. Now, clinical research represents a large and essential component of biomedical research. It involves human participants, so the vulnerable subjects, in the form of living human beings, as well as it may involve human beings who have recently died. It involves cadavers, human remains, and body parts. It can also involve embryos and fetus, human tissue, bodily fluids, and also human data and records, not necessarily medical in any form. And there is another part which you have already a little bit of idea about that, a clinical trial, which denotes a systematic investigation of drugs, devices, or other interventions in human subjects to discover or verify clinical and pharmacological effects with objective of determining safety and efficacy of the intervention. So the word ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, ethos, which means custom or character. In today's context, ethics implies a moral code of conduct defining right and wrong and thereby guiding behavior in civil society. Bioethics has been defined as a systematic study of the moral dimensions, including moral vision, decision, conduct, and policies of the life sciences and healthcare, employing a variety of ethical methodologies in an interdisciplinary setting. In other way around, we can say biomedical research ethics refers to the moral principles guiding biomedical research from its conception through to completion and publication of the result. It may also concern issues beyond publication, for example, the archiving of data and physical samplings. Issues that raise ethical concerns in medicine and biomedical research are ethics in physician-patient relationship. So it is the patient's right and vis-a-vis of physician's privileges, transgression of generally accepted doctor-patient boundaries, negligence, malpractice, reasonable fee versus overcharging. Ethics at the beginning and end of life, assisted reproduction technology, genetic engineering and cloning, euthanasia, which means the mercy killing, which is not legalized in India, but in some countries like Scandinavian countries, Uruguay, it is legalized. And then comes the biomedical research ethics, which includes extent of influence of sponsor over study design, sample size, study duration, outcomes, vulnerable subject issues, informed consent issues, post-trial access to successful interventions, compensation for trial-related injury, ethics issues in statistical analysis, ethics issues in research publication, and also archiving of source materials and data. And there are some other areas like ethics in animal experimentation, ethics in pharmaceutical manufacture, ethics in promotion and marketing, and ethics in terminal or palliative care. You always have to remember while discussing ethics, the study are usually classified into two types: the interventional study and the observational study. Interventional study are usually where the subjects are randomly assigned, and these are usually can be animal trial, but usually the interventional trials and the clinical trials are falling under the interventional study, whereas the observational study can be classified into more or less into three types: the case control study, the cohort study, and the cross sectional study. So more or less these are the basis of the studies on which we are trying to uh, design the our or we are relying our ethical issues and trying to place our ethical advisory so that the studies should be done in a proper manner. So let us have a little bit of idea about the origins of research ethics regulations. Many advances in the medicine, they have a dark past, with research subjects being denied basic information and rights during research. The prevailing view through much of history has been that it is not cruel to inflict on a few criminal sufferings which may benefit multitudes of innocent people through all centuries. It's a saying contributed to the first century by a Roman physician Celsus, which has been the sample argument of researchers in bygone eras. In 1964, let us start with the 1947 rather, in the collective conscience of humanity culminated in the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which overturned the age-old view. Its focus was on protecting research participants from harm and ensuring the element of voluntariness, though valid consents were required in case of research. In 1964, the 18th World Medical Assembly held at Helsinki promulgated the Declaration of Helsinki while reinforcing the two core principles of the need to protect research participants from harm and obtaining informed consent. It introduced new elements to facilitate the research governance process. This declaration introduced the concept of an ethics committee, which must be independent of the investigator, the sponsor, or any kind of undue influence to oversee the ethical aspects of research. In today's world, all biomedical research should incorporate three essential ethical safeguards in addition to following all applicable national and local laws: conformation to the Declaration of Helsinki, approval of the research protocol and supervision of the research process by the ethics committee, and written informed consent from all study participants. The concept has also been extended to animal research to prevent unnecessary or wasteful use and cruelty to experimental animals. The constitution of the Research Ethics Committee in any group formally designated by an institution or body to review approve the initiation of and monitor biomedical research involving human subjects. There are certain basic principles of bioethics. We'll start with autonomy, which is also known as respect. Autonomy, in bracket, you can say it's a respect. It is based on the principle of the right to self determination and respecting the choice of individual study participant. It embodies the informed consent process. It means that you cannot violate this if consent is not voluntary or fully informed. Just if a person is not want to participate in a clinical trial, you just can't forcefully make that person be a part of this. So that is the autonomy. You are giving respect to the principle or the right of self determination and respecting the choice. It can also be violated unwittingly if the study participant belongs to a vulnerable group like child, orphan, illiterate subjects, mentally incompetent, prisoner, students. Don't laugh at that point, students, because I'm not trying to, I mean, violate these norms. I will respect your autonomy, but you are medical students, so you will try to understand the little bit of mockery within this. I mean, phrase. So subordinates, which is very commonly happened in different professions. Minority or marginalized groups. Minority is not only stands only for religion, it is for gender, for anything. I mean, minority stands for minority. So you should not violate that. So autonomy stands for everyone. Then comes the beneficence and non-maleficence, which means do not cause harm. You will not cause harm to the patient. Beneficence is based on the principle that research should benefit either research participants directly or the wider population. And the benefit of the research should outweigh the potential harm to participants. It can be violated if the control intervention is a placebo or not the best available comparator. And then comes the justice and fairness. Suppose I am selecting only male patients for my study, where I can easily take the female patients. That means I am not doing justice. So that is one simple example by which you can understand the role of justice. So justice is based on the principle of ensuring that risks and benefits are equally shared between all study participants and potential beneficiaries of successful studies. It can be violated in clinical trials of costly interventions, in which study participants may have no hope of accessing successful interventions later or because of cost. So it can also be violated if specific communities that might have benefited are excluded from research. I have already given you the example, so from there you can understand this. Beside these main pillars, we also have to keep the confidentiality of the data you are taking from the patient. So that cannot be disclosed as a part of ethics committee member or a part of a board. You cannot disclose the confidentiality of a patient. It's a basic right of an individual, and that data accruing from research activity are to be treated confidentially and not disclosed to unauthorized parties if they are not likely to misuse the information. And the last part is the honesty and integrity. Honesty is based on the principle that all stakeholders in research must be transparent and stick to the truth in all their dealings. It can be violated in many ways, commonly if the researcher withholds vital information from the study participant. The sponsor dissuades the researcher from publishing negative study finding or vested financial interest are involved. So honesty is one of the key parameter in this regard. The composition of ethics committee has to be as a part of application guidelines. Usually, as per we are following the 2006 revised guidelines by the Indian Council of Medical Research (ICMR) and the ethical guidelines for biomedical research or human participants said that the guidelines recommend 5 to 15 members committee can be formed. Chairperson should be from outside the institution. There will be a member secretary. There will be at least one medical scientist, basic medical scientist, ideally from a pharmacologist, a clinician, a legal expert, a layman, a layperson, and a social scientist or a philosopher or priest. So, actually, a committee covering all aspects. It is not only about seeing the scientific merit of the research. It is trying to see all aspect of the research protocol. Now, the activities of research ethics committee will start before the study begins, receiving application for approval, then reviewing proposal, decision making, issuing approval. Then comes the study. When the study is ongoing, you have to review the amendment, monitoring the protocol, monitoring the informed consent, monitoring study progress, reviewing serious adverse effect, reviewing compensation claims. Then comes when the study ends, reviewing study report, addressing the archival issues, monitoring publication related issues, and reviewing compensation claims. The other activities are also like record keeping, framing, training researchers, building awareness. So these are all the role of research ethics committee. What are the issues that concern research ethics committee? Suitability of the investigator, informed consent documents, whether voluntariness clearly explained, risk benefit clearly explained or not, responsibilities clearly explained in the informed consent or not, witnessing provision where appropriately given or where it's needed, you have to call for that. Suitability of the protocol, to frame the objective, whether the objective is proper or not, and whether it is I mean, blending properly with the study design, whether it is appropriate to the study design or not, equitable selection of subjects, justification of risk, and convenience versus benefits. There are some assessing other documents like advertisement of subject selection, case report form, where it is relevant, indemnity to the investigators, and there are some other issues like compensation in event of trial related injury, methods for ensuring compliance, like problem like modalities of study monitoring, confidentiality of subjects and data. So informed consent is basically a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. And this definition is given by International Conference on Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Registration of Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, that is in abbreviation called ICH guidelines. Typically, recruitment of a subject to a clinical study occurs in one of the following ways. The subject may have been identified as a part of a recruitment plan. Subject may simply be part of a patient population being managed. Or a trial may be offered as a treatment option to a patient not responding to standard therapy. There are certain other issues with which the ethical reviews and the informed consents are taken. One is called the assent. If a study participant is a minor, In that case, it's not possible to give consent for that person. You can take it from their parents, but the person is old enough to understand the procedures. Like in case of acne, if it is happened to 12 to 13-year-old girl, she is quite capable, a 13 or 14-year-old girl. She is quite capable of understanding the thing, what you are going to drug you are going to prescribe, or you are going to do some kind of procedure. So a verbal assent should be taken from him or her, and this fact must be documented through a statement signed by the investigator and by the lawyer. The ICMR guidelines state that the assent of the child should be obtained to the extent of the child capabilities, such as in the case of mature minors from the age of 7 years up to the age of 18 years. So that is been specific. Nowadays probably 18 was reduced to most probably 15. You just have to check it out from the Google. The research with vulnerable population, although the basic principles obtained from informed consent transcends therapeutic area, patient profile, differences, but you have to follow certain procedures in case of children and pregnant women, terminally critically ill patient, mentally impaired subjects, institutional subjects, illiterate subjects, so and subjects belonging to very poor tribal or underprivileged groups. So from there you have to find it out. I mean, you have to solve the problem, and you should not allow to do any kind of injustice to this kind of vulnerable populations. You have to do research with archive samples or records. You can always do that. There is one term called therapeutic misconception. By the term this therapeutic misconception, you mean that misconception on the part of a study participant. Particularly, it happened in clinical trial that enrolling in the study in part of his or her medical care without understanding the experimental nature of the intervention proposed. So that is called therapeutic misconception, and that is almost illegal. Waiver of consent. Waiver of consent refers to a situation when obtaining individual informed consent is not considered necessary. This is a little different from situations where obtaining consent is simply not feasible, as in working with archived samples or records. So, the ICMR is of the view that voluntary informed consent can be waived if it is justified that the research involves not more than minimal risk and when the participant and the researcher do not come into contact. Post trial access. By this term, we mean that basically the intervention that will no longer be available once the trial ends, owing to a lack of marketing due to high cost or other reasons. The subjects who have contributed in the successful development of the drug, device, or procedure are not assured of sharing in the benefits. So, that is basically the concept of post trial access. Right to withdraw. The patient is always having the ability or the right to withdraw whenever he or she thinks that they will not participate in a particular study. So a gray area is here, and what to do with the sample specimens or records or data obtained from such subjects. Destroying them is probably one option. It would be a wasteful exercise and come in the way of the very important intention to treat principle while analyzing clinical trial data. Now, another issue in this case is a premature withdrawal is who would ensure that the subject is referred for appropriate alternative treatment and what would be the investigator's responsibility in case of adverse consequences of withdrawal. So that is another aspect where a gray area is remaining in case of right to withdraw. Use of placebo. Placebo means you are giving something like a drug, but it is not a drug, and the patient thinks it's a drug, so it will have actions on the human body, but it will not act as a drug. So some endorphins, enkephalins may be released for that, and a patient might have some beneficial effect with that kind of things. So guidelines mandate that the benefits, risk, burdens, effectiveness of a proposed new treatment, and as you all know, in phase 3 is basically a placebo controlled trial. In one arm you have to give drug, and another arm you have to give the placebo. So it should be tested against those of the best current prophylactic, diagnostic and therapeutic methods. And lastly, the compensation to the research participants. Now, this is the broad consensus for the payments compensation. In all clinical trials, the researcher must disclose the amount of compensation they will pay for the patient in case of any problem happened with the new drug. It should not be so large as to persuade them to take undue risk or volunteers against their better judgment. The point at which inducement becomes excessive is not always clear. The extent of compensation should, however, be similar for all participants and should not be dictated by their occupation or social class. So, with that, I'm concluding my presentation on ethical issues in clinical research. Thank you so much.